All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. And today's guest is a criminal defense lawyer and a colleague of mine, and we went to Osgood together a number of years ago, Neha Chugh. So, Neha, could you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Okay, hi everyone. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to thank JP for having me, or Mr. Rodriguez. I don't know what you call him. Um, so I'm Neha Chugh. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and my practice is in Cornwall, Ontario. And most of you are in Toronto in this class, and watching this. And I admit that before I moved to Eastern Ontario, I had a Toronto bias myself, very big Toronto bias. I grew up in Guelph, Ontario, and spent most of my life in Brampton, Mississauga, Toronto, Southwestern Ontario. Never, ever in a million years did I ever think that I would be living in Montreal, where I live, and practicing in Cornwall, which is I would say, the last major city in Ontario before you hit the Quebec-Ontario border. So what brought me out to Eastern Ontario is marriage. My husband got a job in Montreal, and so we found ourselves moving. And I had a common law degree from Osgood, um, and in Quebec they practice civil law, and so I was unable to practice civil law. I was not a member of the Quebec bar, and the prospect of being able to pass the Quebec bar was just um, foreign to me. It was not going to happen because I don't speak French. So I decided to set up practice in Cornwall. Um, I set up 6 years ago, and I hit the ground running. Um, Somewhere in there, I had some kids. Um, I was pregnant during my articles. After I finished law school, I was pregnant during my articles. Um, and so we moved to Quebec with um, a 2-year-old, and I was pregnant again when we moved. So I set up my practice in Cornwall pregnant with our second. And I had my daughter. And as I was setting up my practice, I would bring her in her car seat, strapped to me, nursing at the office, taking care of everything, and then heading back home to take care of the 2-year-old. So my practice and my children grew and grew and grew. And eventually I found myself with an overwhelming amount of work. So I had a big fish, small pond problem. In Toronto, I had the opposite problem. I was a small fish in a big pond. And all of a sudden, or suddenly, I was in this small pond with lots of available work. And I was just overwhelmed with work. So I hired an associate to help me with criminal law. And then when my criminal law practice had flourished to a point where I no longer needed to take care of my family law files, I hired a family law practitioner who took over my family law cases for me. So there was the three of us and an assistant. And from there, we hired two more lawyers, two more juniors. So there's three of us at the 8 to 10 year level now. And we have two associates who are juniors who work for us and help us with our files. So that's my life in a nutshell. There's obviously some side stories and offshoots, and other, things that I dabble in. But that's how my life ended up from, every weekend going to an Indian wedding in Brampton to being the Brown lawyer in Cornwall, Ontario, where my Indian relatives in Brampton have never even heard of. So that's me.
So, what got you into law to begin with? Why law school?
Okay, so like I said, I'm Indian. I have South Asian parents, and my mom wanted me to go to law school since I was a little girl. And I resisted and resisted and resisted. And I was, no way. Um, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it at all. I studied social work in my undergrad, and sociology. And I was an anti-authoritarian. I was a resistor. I had an opinion about everything, but I wanted to work in policy and I wanted to work in change. And so I went on to do my master's at the University of Guelph. Despite my mom's persistence that I go to law school, I said, no way, I'm not going there. And I went on to work. I had summer jobs with the federal government in policy and community development policy. And I really, really liked it. I really liked the research, and I really liked working with people and working in a team environment. But what I was missing was, what I really missed from my social work days was um, working with clients, working with people, and working with people going through difficult situations. And so that is what really encouraged me to go to law school. I wasn't ready. I wasn't mature enough for a full-time career in my early 20s. I knew I had to do more. I had to do something else. I didn't want to do a PhD at that time because I really wanted to work in a client-centered environment. And I felt that disconnect working in policy. I felt that divide. And so I thought law school, maybe I would find myself in law school. I'd find the answers I was looking for. And so that's why law school. And there's no right reason to go to law school, and there's no wrong reason to go to law school, I would suggest. And that's an unpopular opinion. There are a lot of barriers to go to law school. And the biggest barrier is financial. And then there are other systemic barriers to law school. But kind of finding a landing place, I was lucky enough to come from enough privilege to be able to buy time like that.
So now you're out in Cornwall. How is that like? I mean, I can certainly go in different directions, but I mean, you must stand out at the. I mean, I know courts are virtual now, but in your practice, being in Cornwall, I mean, what's that like?
Well, I thank you for pronouncing my name correctly, but that's just because we knew each other in law school, right? I have been called every name that you could ever imagine. My favorite is Neha Chugh. And sometimes I just call myself that and then giggle for being Neha Chugh. But yes, I do stick out, and I get called things like exotic. I get called ethnic. That's my favorite. That ethnic girl. I was born in Toronto. I was born at St. Joe's Hospital, and I grew up in Guelph of all places. And Guelph in the 80s and 90s was not the Guelph that it is today. So and I grew up on a cul-de-sac in a very white suburban neighborhood. But I moved to Cornwall, and I get asked things like, oh, when did you come to Canada? Once I was asked, I brought my son to work, and I was asked if he was adopted, because he doesn't look like me. He's half white. I get asked a lot of ridiculous questions sometimes, but I've also been treated very fairly by the judiciary. I've been treated very fairly by my duty counsel and Crown colleagues. We get into it in court, but they do take the time to speak to me fairly and treat me like an equal, and I appreciate that. But I have to say, for those of you interested in setting up your own practice, or for anyone who set up their own practice, JP, you probably agree with this, there is no red carpet. Nobody rolls out the red carpet and says, welcome to Cornwall. Can I give you your first 10 clients? And here's $5,000 and thank you for showing up. No one is doing that. It is a business. People are protective of their businesses. People are protective of their clientele. And there were a few hard lessons at the beginning for very well-established, older gentlemen lawyers who were not too excited about the young exotic girl from Guelph, Ontario showing up.
So how do you overcome that challenge? And I think certainly maybe we can start with setting up a practice in general, but setting up one in Cornwall, where I mean you have very little experience in sort of knowing how things are there. It's quite different than from, let's say, we'll lump Guelph in kind of the extended Greater Toronto area, let's say. But how do you go about? Well, now I'm in Cornwall. I want to continue practicing, and I need to set up a business here. What was the first sort of step that you took?
So the biggest piece of advice that I give to people who are setting up in small towns is be persistent in your presence. So the biggest thing that I did was I showed up every day. I showed up. I had an office with my name on it, so I wasn't working out of my car. I made really great contacts with local service providers, and I showed up for them. On days when I wasn't feeling great or the baby kept me up all night, I showed up for work. And I showed up, and sometimes I would sit in my office with nothing to do, but I was a persistent presence in my office and in the local area. So people knew where to find me. People knew that I would be there. People knew that I would be in the courthouse on a court date. So my identity that sets me apart also made me a very likable and locatable person. And so that was my biggest piece of advice. So, a lot of lawyers in other towns will refer their bail hearings to duty counsel. I showed up for all my bail hearings. I attended, and I was there for my clients for all my bail hearings. For a set date or for, a remand or a basic appearance, I would be there. I'd be in the courthouse. I'd be, waiting in the chairs. So people knew that I was persistent with my presence.
And what about your social work background? How does that incorporate into your representation of clients in criminal defense?
So my passion is mental health law. I love working with clients with mental health issues, with addiction, I love my Aboriginal clients. I love them. My social work background has helped me with interview skills, because rapport with clients is huge. I can spend the first 15 minutes of a meeting with the first question, "Hey, how's it going?" Because you can open up that question into so much so many other avenues of conversation. I forget who it was, but in my professionalism course at Osgood, one of the professors told us on our first day, he said, never forget that your client thinks about their litigation every single moment of every single day. So while you go to work and you open a file and then look at the file, then close it and move on to the next file, and then go home and watch The Voice and fall asleep, your client is freaking out about their file. They're freaking out about paying you. They're freaking out about whether they're going to be found guilty. They're freaking out about whether they're going to have to pay costs, depending on the case. They're freaking out about everything. So keep that in mind. And so when my client sits in my boardroom and I say, "Hey, how's it going?" I have that advice running through my head that this person has been waiting for this meeting. They've been waiting to talk to me. They have a million questions. So my social work background has allowed me to build a practice that is client directed, right? Because they're coming to the meeting with questions. Let them get everything off their chest that they want to ask. Let them tell me how much they're freaking out. And then I can assuage them from there.
And you've also had experience on both sides, right? You've done some
Yeah.
prosecution work as well. How you found that kind of lens in maybe in your defense work or vice versa?
So I have the unpopular opinion that to be a very good crown, you have to know um, what it's like to have a client, what it's like to be a defense lawyer. And the best crowns out there are the ones who advocate for defense lawyers and want to see a defense lawyer in the room. Um, I think that both roles are incredibly important. My role in the prosecution is I'm the prosecutor in the Akwesasne court, so in the Indigenous court on reserve. So I get to do really cool things like restorative justice, collaborative approaches to law. It's a very different approach than the traditional prosecutorial approaches that we see, the punitive approaches that we see in um, colonial systems of law. So I really, really enjoy that work because I don't hesitate to step in and withdraw a charge in the name of restorative justice if I can.
And you've also certainly done some teaching as well. How you found that experience?
Teaching? Well, JP, you have the patience of a saint. So I liked teaching. I don't know if I'm a great teacher, but I did like teaching. I think I liked it more than the students liked me. I really liked it. And I was really nice. I gave them really good marks. And if they complained about their marks, I would increase them because I felt bad for them because I'm the defense lawyer for the world. That's what my husband would say. My husband is a professor, and he would hear me talking with my students, like on Zoom during the pandemic, and he'd be like, "Why'd you give him 5 more marks?" I'm like, "I don't know. The guy, he's got kids, and it's like you don't have to be the defense lawyer for the world. Like, what did he do? Show up with a pre-sentence report or something?" I'm like, "I don't know."
Now you've put me on the spot. They're like, oh, if that works for for your students, will that work for us?
He's got a big heart.
I already see it in the chat.
I know.
You should give us
I saw that pop up.
So with a sort of a wide different background there, with different things that you're working on, what do you think kind of really helped get you to where you are today? What was your maybe motivation, or what are some of the things that are responsible for your success?
So grit, just pure grit and stubbornness, my own stubbornness. I realized that by reading my social media and reading blogs, and women spend a lot of time saying, I want to thank my mother and I want to thank the academy and my wonderful husband. And it's true. I joked last week on Twitter that I have a Marty. Marty Ginsburg was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's husband, and he's been all over the news as being an amazing support for the recently passed Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it's true. I have an amazing support network. But I think that what has gotten me to where I am is me. And I think that everyone out there, including you, JP, you should just own it because we got here with grit and hard work and waking up when we didn't want to and dealing with client calls when we didn't want to and, getting reamed out in court and getting in our car and thinking, I didn't want to do that. As a sole practitioner, I gave a talk last year, sorry, about how I set up my business and success in business. And one thing I said was, how many sole practitioners out there can say that they have spent an entire day in court without eating a morsel of food, only to sit in a drive-through at 5:30 and order everything on the menu, pray that you don't have insufficient funds on your debit card, and pray that you don't run out of gas in the drive-through. And I have been there so many times, right? This is not a story of lavishness and, you know, Prada high heels and someone rolling out a red carpet and throwing rose petals and me just arriving at success in my yacht. No, this is like, you know, I would be eating McDonald's in a rural court in like, you know, Hawkesbury, Ontario, where I don't speak a word of French, and I'm just praying that my case gets reached, right? Like those are the hard days, but then there's really good days too, right? There's the good days when, you know, you're done court early, you got an amazing victory for your client, you get to your kid's pageant at 2 o'clock, and you think, oh, life could not get any better, right? So it was taking the good with the bad, it was grit, and it was a lot of hard work. Um, so yeah, I've finally reached the point in my life where I'm owning my success.
So what can you say for women, and particularly women of color in criminal defense? It's been sort of called as the quote unquote old boys club, right? How can they get into this profession and navigate it successfully like you have?
So you get into the profession by getting into the profession. So just do it. Get in, and don't let anyone tell you that you're not doing it right. And don't listen to the naysayers out there who tell you how you should practice and how you should be and how you should behave and how you should act. And you're going to get that naysaying from your family, and you're going to get that naysaying from inside yourself, and you're going to get the negative feedback externally. So you're going to get it from all sides. Um, the biggest thing is to grit your teeth and to keep going, because and to find your people, and to find your champions. So I found my people. It took time, but eventually through the Criminal Lawyers Association and through the South Asian Bar Association and through Twitter, of all places, I met my people through Law Twitter, right? And people who just magnetized to me, and I magnetized too. And so be patient and find your people.
So you mentioned your Twitter there, and very popular, I think, in the legal circles.
I deleted it from my phone. I'm trying to quit. I'm an addict.
So what can you say? Because I think that there's a sort of a disconnect maybe sometimes with lawyers and paralegals and those maybe just in the legal community in general with social media and using it. You have some of the most brilliant legal minds, but they don't sort of take advantage of that platform. So what maybe advice can you have for my students who may be a little bit more tech savvy than sort of the average legal practitioner about how to use platforms like Twitter and other social media to expand your business or just get your name out there?
So the first thing I did was I decided to develop kind of a niche on Twitter. So if you look at my handle, it's full-time lawyer, full-time mom, and then PhD student, because I talk about some research but I also made a decision that I wasn't going to be too deep on Twitter. So a lot of the stuff I tweet is just jokes about parenting. Sometimes I talk about, things that are crappy at work, crappy things someone said, but I don't get too deep. I don't name names. There's no identifiers. And typically I do it because I know someone else is going through it too. And I know I do it in a way that is helpful for the community rather than hurtful to the individual who did it. So for example, last week I was called, in correspondence between lawyers, I was called unprofessional. And I don't think that I was unprofessional. In fact, objectively speaking, I was not unprofessional, but that's just how lawyers talk to one another. We're mean to each other, right? So I tweeted about it, but I was careful. I didn't put the lawyer's name. I didn't put the organization that they work for. I made it about me, only about me. The funny stuff that I tweet about my family and my kids is just to humanize me. It's just to place me in context. And it typically is a riot. Like, it's just fun, right? And get some comments, gets people talking. I do write letters to the newspaper about social issues. I tweet that. I tweet letters that my friends have written to the newspaper because I like to bolster their practices or boost their identities and boost their opinions. So I do that as well. So I hope I've answered your question, JB.
So, student, there had a kind of follow up. Has any of your tweets ever got you in any trouble, or I guess maybe not necessarily the attention you may be looking for, or what's sort of the reaction? I know even like the tweet there about unprofessional, there's a lot of comments and a lot of likes to it. So
Yeah.
it is very receptive, whether in the legal community only or beyond that.
So no, I haven't gotten in any trouble. Not yet. Maybe one day my son will get on my case about me posting about his little contract that he wrote for me about doing his homework, but not yet. The other thing that I would really strongly recommend to everyone out there is don't fight with people on social media. There's a lot of trolls out there. Don't get into it. It's not worth it. You're not going to win. There is nothing to win. And it'll only hurt you to get into a fight with someone on Twitter. The other thing is that for those of you who want to get into litigation or appear in front of judges, is the judges are on Twitter. Some of them have accounts where they name themselves. Some of them have shadow accounts, and they talk about it. They're going to talk about, like, if a judge has Twitter, he or she is going to talk about what they've seen. So never write something that you don't want a judge to read, ever. So never write something in a public forum that you don't want a judge to read.
And on that, what advice to kind of tune out the trolls or tune out the noise there? How do you kind of just resist? I mean, now you took Twitter off your phone, but I think maybe that's one step. But what else can you do to, especially because we're lawyers and paralegals, and you want to get that last word in edgewise, in court. How do you kind of shut down? Whether, I mean, it certainly can go beyond social media, but just turn down the argument and say, okay, that's it. I'm going to call it a night.
Doesn't it feel so good to win? But you're not going to win. So I took Twitter off my phone because I have a deadline and for school. And I know that my academic supervisor is on Twitter, and I know he sees me on Twitter wasting time. So that's why I took it off my phone, because I was like, I cannot. And today I actually quoted something from an academic piece that I'm reading, so that he would know that I'm working.
Hope he's not watching this.
Yeah, he can't be watching this. So so the question was, how do I avoid it? And I have to say, I have posted things before that I'm like, I second guess it, and I just end up just deleting it before too many people have a look at it. I asked myself, how would this, if this went into an affidavit, how would it look? If this went into an affidavit about my character, how would it look?
And that's excellent to kind of because again, it's like you want to get that point and you want to win, and it's is any other aspects? You talk a lot about your family there, right? I mean, how does it work with the family? Like, do you have to say, look, you know what, I'm not in court right now. I gotta stop with the lawyer talk.
The number of times that I say to my kids, I'll hear your arguments now. No, I've heard you. Now it's mommy's turn to talk. Turning off the lawyer mind at home is hard, but my days are so long at work that by the time I get home, I'm jelly. And I mean, the kids are like, mommy, can I have this? And I'm like, sure, mommy's purse, just go get my purse. Okay, sure, whatever you want. Yeah, okay. It's usually on the weekends. It's like by Saturday at 4:00 when I finally get my energy back and I'm able to be a full-time mom again.
So what what in terms of trying to find some kind of way to get through lengthy days, and then the family and all the other stuff you're doing. How do you do it? I mean, what's the key maybe ingredient for success with that?
Forgiveness of self. The number of times that my kids have been the last two kids in the daycare, staring out the window with the snow falling, and I arrive and I'm late and I'm apologizing to them. The kids will forgive you. Forgive yourself. The kids will be grateful. Your kids are resilient. That's what I keep telling myself, is my kids are resilient and they will forgive me. I have one daughter. I have two sons and one daughter. And I always tell myself that my daughter will benefit by watching mommy work hard, and my sons benefit by watching their fathers support a hardworking woman. And so that's how I push through it.
And with COVID-19, and how has that impacted, I guess, all aspects there of your life, but maybe your practice and how do you adapt in that situation?
Oh, so, okay. So the weekend in March, when we found out the courts were closing, I think I felt my heart in my stomach. And I remember getting all 5 of the lawyers on the phone and my staff, and we had a conference call. It was that weekend, like March 12th or something, or 13th. And I could barely string 2 sentences together because I thought to myself, everything that I've worked for is going to collapse. I'm going to lose my office building. I own my building. I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose my practice. I'm going to lose my way of life. I'm going to lose everything. And everyone was really supportive, and we all came together and worked really hard. I'm in a practice that supports local community, and my clients kept getting arrested in the summer. So I had a continuous stream of work. The work didn't die, but I just did not have a forum for where I could bill my clients. So the courts were just not open. We were doing a lot of bail hearings. I really benefited from the wage subsidy. The biggest thing that happened in my life in March and April and May. So I mentioned that I was pregnant during my articles. I gave birth on June 3rd, and I started my first job as an associate in August. So I didn't really take a break because we were moving and we had a new baby, and I didn't really take a break. My second child, I was setting up my practice. I never took a maternity leave with her. I was bringing her to the office. My third child, I took the summer off last year. I had him last year, but my spouse was in a position to take a paternity leave, so he took a year off. What happened was that I was able to physically, emotionally, and mentally shut down. And it was exactly what I needed to do for myself. And I was able to reset my mind and reset my life. I started to exercise again. Hadn't exercised in 9 years. We started to eat dinner as a family. That had never happened. My kids are terrible eaters. I learned that. My daughter lives on a subsistence of candy. I learned that about her over COVID. I learned how to play Fortnite. That was cool. It was just like a really cool experience that I just got to reconnect with these really interesting and cool people in my life that I had never really met before. It was my 3 children. And it's a different world now. Like, I go home from work at 4:30, and since we reopened, and I'm giving more and more work to my juniors associates because I want to be home at 4:30. And it was a really good reset for me.
And I guess in Cornwall, courts are they still virtual, or is it in person there, or what's going on?
It's a blend of virtual and in person. Trials are kind of in person, and yeah, it's a blend.
And have you prepared any differently for things on Zoom, I think, versus in person? Is there something different? Are you a fan of it? Do you think it's an improvement to access to justice or a step back? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I have so many thoughts on this. So, for my generation, so I'm a millennial, and the lawyers in my firm are millennials. So we love Zoom. It's great. Why weren't we doing Zoom 5 years ago? For the older generation, it's really, really difficult, and it's hard to work. It's harder, I find, as a millennial, if I have a co-accused with, and I don't want to be disparaging or disrespectful at all, but it does get tough. I work with clients who don't have cell phones. To ask them to log into Zoom Court is a big ask. I have clients who are logging into Zoom Court from payphones. So it's a really, really big ask. I think that in order to improve access to justice, we need to rethink the basic living standards of our clientele. So access to internet, access to computers, access to telephones, and access to phones. That's what true access to justice looks like, in my mind. I think that in terms of Zoom trials and Zoom motions, I think a lot can be said about demeanor evidence, and a lot is lost by demeanor evidence over Zoom platforms. There is a time and place for Zoom. Access to justice can be achieved for a motion just on case law, but there's a lot of nuance that is lost over Zoom. I miss court. I miss sitting in plea court all day. I miss the funny things that happen and the notes that get passed, and the sounds of the chains and the door slamming and the funny things that your client says or looks at you funny, and the judge asks your client if they have anything to say, and you kind of hold your breath, and I miss those little moments. I really do.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. You notice that, I mean, sort of this Toronto maybe mentality of everyone has internet, everyone has cell phones, and going out to Cornwall. What can you sort of maybe compare the experiences you've had, and what are sort of maybe things that people don't realize about what's going on, and certainly by extension some of the other areas around there? What's different with respect to a criminal defense practice there?
So there's a huge rural contingent out here in Cornwall. We don't have a subway system. People don't live in condos, and there's no path connecting the condos. People live in farmhouses that are half a kilometer apart, or in small towns where there's no mall. If they want to go to a big mall, they go to Ottawa or they go to Montreal, which is an hour and a half away. There's no Costco here. There's no department store. There's a little mall, but the Sears just closed down. So we have a main street that is colorful and thriving, but has, vintage stores. We are small town Canadiana. Internet is not always stable. It is rural internet. There are parts of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry, which is the county, where there's no cell phone reception. cell phone reception is an access to justice issue in the COVID-19 days. So in Toronto, it's, jump in an Uber and you'll just get there. There's no Uber in Cornwall. There's no Uber Eats. And I see the comment before, when winter hits, I can imagine that's all I can read in it. It's true. If there's a snowstorm, sometimes the whiteouts on the 401 are so bad from the farmland that, I just have to stop because I can't drive in. So there is a new push in Cornwall for, I've seen a lot of immigration happening in Cornwall. A big South Asian population has arrived in Cornwall. And that's interesting for me because I'm South Asian. But I see a lot of systemic racism. I see a lot of a disconnect between the institutions and the new residents in Cornwall.
Is there, I look at the time, there's any students here with any questions? I know a few of you posted them here in the chat that I asked. But
I'm gonna read the chat now and see what you guys are saying.
I see, you have a friend who wants to play Fortnite with you at least.
No, I told my kid we can only play with kids under the age of 10. That's the rule in the house. No adults.
What would you say is maybe your most significant achievement that you'd be the most proud of in your, I mean, maybe not just in your practice, but what are you most proud of in your accomplishments?
I had a baby with no drugs. My second daughter, my first daughter, second child, I couldn't get an epidural, and I had her. If anyone ever asks me what my biggest accomplishment is, that's the first thing I think of, because that was so effing painful. When you're having a baby, take the drugs. The other accomplishment that I would say is I did it. I made it. I did it when people told me I couldn't. I set up in a town where I knew nobody, and now we are the biggest barrister firm in town, and I love it.
And it must be pretty, I know you must be feeling pretty ecstatic when you get to hire people on and
Yeah.
Especially during a pandemic. So there's a question here from Jasmine. Would you say it's difficult being a female criminal defense lawyer? Do your clients look at you any different and treat you any different? Especially being in Cornwall, I can imagine there may not be that many female criminal defense lawyers of color as well. What's that like?
Well, if they're going to look at me differently, they don't become my clients. So by the time they become my clients, they've made that decision to be my client. And so it's too late for them to look or think any differently, unless, of course, they decide to have misgivings after the fact. And that's usually not gender related or color related, because they knew what they were getting into when they met me. But do they treat me any differently? I'm a young woman, and I get a call called a girl or Missy. I was called Missy last month. People comment on my youthfulness. Oh, you're so young. How long have you been doing this? And as if it's fodder, if it's as if it's like an open topic of conversation. I want to talk about your case. Let's talk about the law. We don't need to talk about my hair. That's not the subject of this conversation. But I do represent a lot of women, and I represent a lot of youth, and I have a big mental health clientele, and it's because of my social work background, and it's because of my approach of nurturing empathy, and whether that's a female trait or just my trait, I don't know. but it's a special skill that I'm able to bring to the table.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed reconnecting, and perhaps maybe you could share with my students, share any final words of advice for them, as well as again, if they want to reach out to you. I don't know if
Absolutely.
again, I think it's important to, you said, to have mentors, and I think
Sure.
you'd be an excellent person if someone wants to reach out to mentor. I know one of my former guests that are colleagues there is now being called to the justice there, Lorianne Thomas. So then someone I know that you've worked with or looked up to. So I think it's important to have more people that can have these roles for students to look at, especially people that look like them, right? And I think I'm really happy when I look at the demographics of my class, because I mean, if we go back to law school, the demographics there, it's not necessarily reflective of
No.
of the Ontario population.
No, and you have so much to give. Each of you have so much to give. And remember what our law school professor told us, that your client, whether it's a landlord-tenant issue or a civil claim or a criminal claim or whatever it is thinking about their case a lot. So there is, sometimes this desire to say, oh my goodness, client X is spam texting me, or I can't believe he called me at 11 o'clock at night. But he or she is doing that because they're stressed. And they are human. And so we represent humans. And that's why I love criminal law, is the humanity of it. And wasn't it exciting that Lori got appointed? Justice Thomas got appointed? That's so exciting. So exciting. She's such a role model.
Perfect. And again, if you didn't catch the email address there in the chat, it's there for that. I'll copy and paste that for you. So if you want to reach out, thank you so much. And again, I just want to echo comments here from Jasmine. Your story was very inspiring, and it's great to hear from such a strong woman of color. I could really relate to your way of thinking. I truly enjoy this conversation. And again, so thank you so much for joining us, and wish you all the best out there in Cornwall.
Thanks for having me.
And take care. And again, you can also follow her on Twitter. I think you'll enjoy, if you enjoy this conversation, you can certainly enjoy her tweets. I think she'll post that there for you, and I can certainly share that as well. So all the best, and thanks for joining us. And thank you again for all the students for taking part today.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Neha. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Neha.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a great
All right,
day.
thank you.